Good afternoon. Not legal advice. Like, subscribe, share, show to your canines and all your pets. I think I mentioned I was going to just try a little portion of a depo for that I would do on Mr. Genselr. And so I was thinking about it, his testimony at the last hearing, along with some other stuff. I figured, it might be fun just to show you some questions I might ask. So, a deposition, I'm trying to garner information. I'm also probably trying to get the witness to take certain positions because that testimony then will be typed up into a booklet form and then could be used in court, depending on how somebody testifies. So this is in a civil proceeding, not a criminal proceeding. And it would be if, for example, if Gary Gensler was a witness in my arbitration case, for example. So if he was a witness in my arbitration case, he's kind of set forth knowledge about MMTLP. So maybe I include him as a witness in my arbitration case. And so be it. Today I filed a discovery motion, a supplemental discovery motion, where in addition to a bunch of shared documents, in other words, I've asked for the aggregated audited share count, etc. And I've also asked for the deposition of Gary Gensler because he's a witness who has knowledge, obviously, about MMTLP. And because, I'm going to leave that for as we get into the questioning. So we're going to pretend a little bit here. This is, again, not legal advice, but we're going to pretend that I'm deposing Mr. Genselr in a civil action. He's sitting right there across from me. I'm looking at him. His attorney is to his left, and to my left is a court reporter. So I'm not going to do an entire deposition, and I might do it somewhat differently. And since I'm going to, or hopefully going to be deposed Mr. Genselr, here is a preview. This certainly is not the entirety, but this is stuff that you can think about and make sure you have answers set at the time that we get to engage in those proceedings if we do. So without further ado, I will begin. And again, I'm just picking, this is just a small section and kind of a version of how I would depose him. So, good morning, Mr. Genselr. You're here for your deposition. I'm Richard Hofman. I represent plaintiff. You're here with counsel. I know you've probably had your deposition testimony taken before, but I'm going to briefly go over the ground rules. I'm here asking you questions. Your counsel is sitting next to you, and there's a court reporter. The court reporter will take down whatever is said here today. So it's important that you give me your best testimony as you sit here today. You understand that? Yes. If you don't understand anything, let me know. If you answer a question, I will presume you understood that. Is that fair enough? Yes. Have you ever had your deposition testimony taken? Yes. So there'll be a series of rules that I'll set forth, and I'll basically say that he shouldn't make any material changes because those can be commented on. And eventually this stuff will all be typed up into a booklet. It'll be sent to you. You can review it, make any changes, corrections. But if you do, that can be commented on by people like me at trial. It might impeach your credibility. It might hurt your case. So once we're done with that, I would go in and I'd start off and asking about his education, his employment history, his time at Goldman, how he got to the SEC, how long he's been to the SEC, what he's done there. That could take hours, by the way, but I would get to that. And then at some point in time, I would get into areas, and this may not be, by the way, continuous. So these questions may not be questions I would ask in order. There might be like segments of questions. But I thought it would be fun if you understood kind of what kind of questions I might ask. And Mr. Genselr, if you're listening, get ready for these questions. So it'd be interesting. So I'm just going to start off, and I'm going to provide answers just to kind of for complete sake. And just think of, when I'm saying the answer, think of, this is Gary Gensler. Wah, wah. That's the sound he's making, okay? So let's begin. In your career, how many U3 halts have you been aware of? Would you agree that it is a small number? And so I get an answer from that. He says, yes. Do you agree it requires someone to determine that extraordinary circumstances exist to impose that remedy? I don't know if he'll know that. He might. He'll either say yes or he'll say, I don't know. And you learned about the U3 halt regarding MMTLP, is that correct? And he would answer yes. And did you learn about it prior to December 9th, 2023? Is that something that your general counsel told you? And who was your general counsel, the general counsel of the SEC in December 2022? If you did not learn about the circumstances of the U3 halt prior to December 9th, 2022, had you heard of MMTLP prior to December 9th, 2022? And when and how did you first hear about MMTLP? When and from who did you first hear about problems involving MMTLP? How about as to the U3 halt? Now we get answers as to those in various degrees, and depending on the answer, I would either follow up the answer or take it a different direction. You can just follow up answers, and that could be in the entirety of a deposition. And do you know who Robert Cook is? He's the head of FINRA. I'm sure Mr. Gensler would know that. He indicated that he had a very close relationship with his general counsel on a daily basis and relied on his general counsel to take care of legal matters and keep him apprised of the legal fires. Is that how you would characterize your relationship with the general counsel? It's going to be a yes or no. If not, how would you describe your relationship with your general counsel? And he would tell me, but ultimately the general counsel reports to you, correct? And that would be a yes. And the general counsel will offer recommendations for you as to ongoing legal matters impacting the SEC. And the answer will be something of a yes. And you still rely on the general counsel informing you in time about major legal issues that are impacting or might impact the SEC. Is that correct? I think he's got to say yes, or else the general counsel is not doing its job and the head of the SEC knows it. If not, but ultimately, you're responsible for all the decisions made at the SEC. Isn't that correct? And he'd have to answer that yes. And am I correct that you try to fight fraud brought to your attention? And he's a big anti-fraud guy, so I think his answer is yes. And in fact, part of your platform is that you seek out to fight fraud. Isn't that correct? I think that's another answer is a yes. And your senior staff knows not only to not ignore fraud, but to stop it. Is that correct? I think the answer has got to be yes again. And your senior staff brings issues related to securities fraud to your attention, especially when the issue is current. Isn't that correct? I think the answer would be yes to that also. Have you seen any of the replies provided by the SEC to an MMTLP shareholder in 2023 per a response to a FOIA request? And the answer is either going to be yes or no. And in reality, I'm sure he has, but he may testify otherwise, and I don't know for certain. If yes, when did you see it and who showed it to you? If no, were you familiar with MMTLP prior to December 2022? And if so, in what regard? Have you ever seen the redacted email dated 12/5/2022 from Sam Drady to 3 redacted SECers and 2 others? That's a yes or no. If so, do you recall what it said? Didn't it say, and he may say no, did it say MMTLP had already hit the SEC fraud team unit? And he'll either say yes or no, he remembers or not. What was the SEC fraud unit as of December 2022? And he'll either, I assume since fraud is such an essential part of his program, that he will know about the SEC fraud unit. Who headed it? Who did they report to? I presume they report to him. And what was their job? And I think it's to root out fraud, and I think an answer would be something like that. And do you recall being told about MMTLP being referred to the fraud unit of the SEC on or about December 5th, 2022? And that will be a yes or a no. Do you recall seeing an email that referenced that MMTLP was being referred to the SEC fraud unit in or about December 22nd? And that's either a yes or no. If yes, how many emails? Do you recall what they said? If no, that's fine also. Was it your practice to review emails in a timely manner after you receive them? It's probably going to be a yes. And is it correct to presume that that was the same practice of your staff in December 2022? And that answer is probably going to be a yes also. So let me show you as Exhibit 1, and we'll mark this as Exhibit, court reporter will mark this as Exhibit 1 and attach it to the transcript. Let me show a partially redacted email dated December 5th, 2022, Exhibit 1 from Sam Drady. This is the email that we've been referring to in the prior questioning. And take a look at it. And when you're ready, I'll begin asking you some questions. Okay. Have you ever seen this email before? Yes. If so, when was the first time? Did you see the email prior to December 8th, 2023? That'll either be a yes or a no, or he doesn't remember. Are you referenced in one of the redacted email addresses? Do you understand that question? Let me explain it. In other words, if you look at that, let's look at that Exhibit 1. Do you see in Exhibit 1, there's 3 redacted names of SEC people that were not where the communication was directed to. Do you see that? Yes, I do. Do you know who those people are? That's going to be a yes or no. Could be that a yes, but I can't disclose those names. Could be no, he doesn't know. Are you personally referenced in one of the redacted email addresses? He'll answer yes or no or the same objection. It'll be interesting. I do not know. Do you know who the individuals are reflected in the redacted email address? That's a yes or no. He either does or does not. Do you know if your general counsel is one of the people referenced in the redacted email address? Yes, no, or objection. Have you ever discussed the contents of this email with your general counsel? That's a yes or no. Let's say he says, I don't know. Let's say he says yes. So if he says, I don't know, then I could ask him questions about this. Since this was about the fraud team, isn't this likely to be an area you would have discussed with general counsel? Something along those lines. But if he says yes, I would ask him about when was the first time you discussed MMTLP with your general counsel. And as a side issue, I'd ask him about the general counsel because of the close relationship between a CEO and a general counsel, so that the CEO would likely know day to day what's going on as to material issues. Since you were anti-fraud, or that was your posture, I presume that the anti-fraud team was told to make you aware of fraud investigations. Is that correct? I assume that's true, or else the anti-fraud team is full of crap. So take a look at this document. Do you see where it states someone at the SEC had spoken to Patricia Casamates and the general counsel's office? Do you see that? And you see it encourages further communication between FINRA and the SEC regarding MMTLP? And when did you first become aware of communications between FINRA and the SEC regarding MMTLP? And I'll get an answer. How many times and what was discussed? And I'll go into each one of the communications. He may know some, he may not know some. I'd show him some documents to try to refresh his memory. That's what I would do. So isn't it correct that one of the redacted names in Exhibit 1 is an SEC lawyer or general counsel? And he would say yes or no, and he would either answer or not answer. Either way, this would be a question. So isn't this true? Either way, you're responsible for protecting the markets and abhor fraud and move quickly to correct it. Is that true? I think he has to say yes. And since this references fraud, this email, that was pervasively known, because it says it was, you would have known about it at the time of these you would have known about it at the time of these emails and tried to do something about it. Isn't that correct? And I don't know what he'll say, of course. Would it be correct to say that after the problem arose with MMTLP, even if you did not know about it at first, if it involves fraud, you would stay on top of the subject to see if it got resolved? Isn't that correct? I think he has to say yes to that. So let me show you a document dated December 11th, 2022, which is another email, after the institution of the U3 halt, when the issue was on fire. Do you recall that? He may not. Do you recall that the SEC reached out to FINRA on December 11th, 2022 to get an update regarding the trading halt? Do you recall that? Do you know who at the SEC is redacted in this email, Exhibit 2? Do you know who at the SEC had communication with FINRA with regard to MMTLP? And he's going to have to answer these questions. Who at the SEC told you about this email, the December 11th email? Were you told about it when it happened at the meeting? Were you told what happened between the meetings between FINRA and the SEC about MMTLP fraud? Yes or no? If he says no, I said, well, you said you were interested in and your policy was anti-fraud. So why wouldn't you have followed up on this matter when you were involved and knew about it? And if there was fraud asserted in any claim, you would take that seriously and stay on top of it, Mr. Gensler, correct? He'd probably say yes. And then I'd quickly move on, just quickly, another area I would touch, and I would do a lot more extensive questioning, but just to give you an idea, that's some of the questioning I would do. But then I would also ask him briefly, in hearings, why do you never testify as the person most knowledgeable of the SEC? And he might say, I don't understand the question. Well, you always testify that this is personal and not on behalf of the SEC. But you're running the SEC, so why don't you testify on behalf of the SEC? Aren't you the person most knowledgeable with regard to your own agency? Question mark. And I'm going to stop there. So that's just a kind of an idea of certain questions I would ask, a portion of. And if he, just to kind of give you a further, so I asked a bunch of questions. He could say yes, no, I don't remember, or whatever. There may be objections stated also to certain questions, especially about the redacted names, etc., which I think are important. So if there was objections to those, he was told not to provide that information, I could then make a motion to have that information provided, some kind of discovery motion. And that's how it would work if it was a deposition. And if they didn't provide it, there could be sanctions imposed. The sanctions would be monetary sanctions at first, and it could end up in a end of the case sanctions, depending on it. So that's just kind of an idea. As I sat down literally for 15 minutes in my car, as JR knows, and I just kind of, on my phone, I did these, and this is what I came up with. Just off the top of my head, if I was going to do a full deposition, it would be multiple hours, multiple subjects, and it would establish a record that would bind the witness from not changing it. And if anybody needs their deposition taken taken, it's Gary Gensler, or as we like to call him, DH. Anyway, so I hopefully the questioning was insightful and not too boring, but that's kind of what I would ask. And again, if there was a witness there, they would answer, and I would deviate also to follow their answer, and then get back to the questions I wanted to ask. Anyway, hopefully it's interesting, not too boring. Hope everybody's well. I'll see you tomorrow night. We got Ham, the short killer, and JR. And on Monday night, we have Frank Benedetto and the CEO of Astra. And I'll send out a update on that too. Anyway, be well, everybody. Hope that was informational and instructional. And take care.